When on November 27, 1995, Manohar Ramsaran was sworn in as the newly elected Member of Parliament for Chaguanas, he was venturing into these hallowed halls of the Trinidad and Tobago Parliament for the very first time.
I took my seat in Parliament, and the rest I served as Minister of Social Development. And I love politics. I love politics all along since 1962, when I was only 12 years old. I followed politics, and I remember the debates with Dr. Capel there in my era. In that time, I didn't know much before. Dr. Williams and those politicians, and I would listen to them, follow their stories, follow what they stand for and so on. And I was always involved, always liked politics.
It was under a new speaker, the late Hector McLean, that Manohar Ramsaran would take his seat as a Member of Parliament in the 5th Republican Parliament, fresh from ending a 27-year career as a public servant, serving in later years as a Customs and Excise officer. Little did he suspect that over the next 6 years, he would be given responsibility for one of the largest ministerial portfolios in the UNC government of Prime Minister Bassio Pandey. That, as Minister of Social and Community Development and Sports, Youth Affairs and Gender Affairs, he would be one of several super ministers in the Pandey cabinet. A close colleague in that 1995 to 2000 Parliament, and for 1 year in the 6th Parliament, the former MP for St. Joseph, Mervyn Assam, remembers that he too was one of those who had held a heavy and diversified portfolio as Minister of Enterprise Development, Tourism and Foreign Affairs. But Manohar Ramsaran, he suggests, may have entered Parliament with a bit of an advantage.
I suppose the position that he held in the public service probably prepared him for this kind of assignment, because from what little I know of the Customs and Excise Division and in the public service as a whole, if you are there long enough, you learn a lot about not only your own department, but other departments and ministries. And remember, the Customs and Excise Department was a division of the Ministry of Finance. And he must have learned quite a bit, both in terms of procedure, in terms of administration, in terms of organization. And in his own way, he probably had certain goals that he wanted to achieve, and plus the fact that the government had its own plans and programs which each minister had to fulfill and implement.
For Manohar Ramsaran, his first few months in Parliament involved a matter of looking, listening and learning.
I think I'm a person who loves to learn. The learning curve for me continues. I always go into somewhere observing and be very careful and thoughtful before I act. And I think the first couple of months I did that. I look around, I read the standing orders, I spoke with people and so on, and who were there before me, and that's how I did it. I use it as a learning process, and I thought I fit in quite well, if I may say so myself, in a couple of months.
And Manohar Ramsaran did fit in well among his fellow parliamentarians. An avid sportsman, he was soon instrumental in getting parliamentarians from both sides of the political divide to put aside their political rivalry for a moment and fraternize on the cricket field.
I like to see people not only in jacket and tie, but outside there, mingling with people. And some MPs first time play cricket. You know, first time people play cricket when I organize those games, because they look at the cricket box and ask me, what's that for? So, you know, someone who never played cricket in their life, and they came out there and we enjoyed ourselves. And with the opposition, we had good times, as a matter of fact. And it was again through sports. I remember taking a catch of Rowley, and he came and hugged me and said, it's the best catch ever taken off his bowling.
But in that 5th Republican Parliament, it was not all cricket and hugging for Manohar Ramsaran. Far from it. There was a grim reality of the ultra-slim majority which the coalition UNC-NAR government enjoyed in Parliament. There was the reality of the low oil price that would significantly affect the government's development goals and ambitions. The oil price in 1996 fluctuating between US $19 and US $25 per barrel. There were the expectations of a population that continued to be assailed by a surfeit of anxiety over the dire economic and political fortunes in which the government had been tottering for so long. And there was poverty, too much of it, for a country described as oil-rich, a situation which fell to none other than the Minister of Social Development, Mr. Ramsaran, to address.
When we came into office, I'm not too sure whether the figure is correct, but it was suggested that people in Trinidad, there were about 23 or 24% of the people in Trinidad living below the poverty line. How that is determined differs from country to country and from perspective to perspective. But certainly it was the intention to bring down that figure to one that was more in line with the projections of the government to become what was called at the time a first world country. This was subsequently changed to 2020 vision and developed status, whatever it is. But I think we started it off in describing it as the vision of a first world country, and therefore you had to bring down the levels of poverty. You had to reduce the number of people who were living below the poverty line. And this was one of the focuses of the Ministry of Social Development to do so.
So, with a reduction in poverty in mind, Minister Ramsaran set about focusing on social legislation. He was able to secure new old age pension provisions, first in 1996, to improve the qualifying residential conditions set out for persons able to access the grant, and again in 1999 to increase the grant by $100.
So I had to go in there and justify increase of old age pension, put it against the poverty line. For example, look at the minimum wage and try to get people, and my vision then was to get old age pension above the poverty line. So at least an old age pensioner would not be a poor person according to the definition of the United Nations.
By the end of his term as Social Development Minister, Manohar Ramsaran would be successful in getting old age pensions increased from $356 to $800 per month, contributing significantly to what was a heavy legislative agenda during that fifth Parliament. Mr. Ramsaran also set about tackling public assistance legislation and was successful in securing an amendment that provided equal treatment for all needy people with disabilities. He also got Parliament to agree to an alternative to custody legislation, providing for community service orders for the first time in Trinidad and Tobago. And he went after the vagrancy problem with a vengeance, tapping the wits and resources of prominent city businessmen and of social workers like the late Steve Solomon of the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Minister Ramsaran also pinned renewed focus on the welfare and needs of the country's children.
Oh, it was a very heavy legislative agenda. In fact, I think there were about 6 or 7 bills pertaining to children, which up to today have not been fully implemented or have not been either assented to. All of the bills pertaining to the protection of children, the establishment of a children's authority and all these sort of things were initiated in that period under Manohar Ramsaran's ministerial watch.
Minister Ramsaran was equally vigorous, pursuing developments under his community development portfolio. He says when he first went to community development, he discovered that there was a particular senior official who appeared to have a problem with implementation. He immediately passed on to that official the exclusive responsibility for dealing with policy matters and set about appointing another official to implement policy. But if he excelled with his social legislation in and out of Parliament, it was under his sport and youth affairs portfolio that Manohar Ramsaran really made his mark. Or, to be more specific, he got the government, in the face of crippling financial constraints, to embark on an ambitious Stadia construction project in preparation for hosting the FIFA Under-17 World Football Championships in Trinidad and Tobago in 2001. The project would involve refurbishing the renamed Hazley Crawford Stadium at Mucurapo and constructing 4 new stadia that now stand proudly in testimony to the resolve of Minister Ramsaran and his government. They are the Larry Gomes Stadium in Arima, the Manny Ranjan Stadium in Marabella, the Atto Bolden Stadium in Couva, and the Dwight York Stadium in Tobago. As Mr. Ramsaran recalls, it was no cakewalk. The oil price had dropped and a number of his cabinet colleagues wanted the project shelved in favor of more pressing demands on the country's coffers. But Manohar Ramsaran stood his ground, emphasizing the opportunities that were at hand and pinpointing his visions for the stadia as a basis for sports tourism. He credits former Minister of Finance Brian Quaitong as one of the ministers who supported him.
Mr. Quaitong got up and said, Prime Minister, I want to support Manohar on this one. We cannot stop the construction sector, the economy will fall flat. There must be, and he said he will negotiate to get the finances. And how we finance that, it was Royal Bank, Guardian, and Mutual, RGM group of companies. They came together, they built, they still own, they finance these facilities. So the ministry had nothing to do except be the driver, right? Monies didn't pass through the Ministry of Sport or anybody else. It was through this thing. And of course, FIFA guided us with the expertise and so on.
The stadia were completed before the target date and within budget. And as was his nature to do, Manohar Ramsaran accepted his success quietly and without fanfare.
Manohar Ramsaran was really a very quiet, mannered person, a very mild-mannered person. So he didn't run into controversy and he didn't give you any kind of impression that he was trying to rock the boat or to do anything like that. He went about his business in a very quiet and a very diligent fashion, and he tried to do as best as he can in the portfolios to which he was allotted.
Manohar Ramsaran would serve as a Minister of Government in both the 5th and the 6th Republican parliaments. However, his position as a government minister following an outright UNC election victory in 2000 was short-lived. Just 1 year into office, the UNC government collapsed as it fell victim to a torrid spate of infighting among its ranks in the parliament. This led Prime Minister Basio Pandey to call new elections in 2001. But those snap elections resulted in a rare parliamentary dilemma, a hung parliament. The UNC and the PNM had each won 18 of the then 36 seats. In a controversial decision, President of the Republic A.N.R. Robinson awarded the position of Prime Minister to incumbent opposition leader Patrick Manning, who went on to call yet another general election in 2002. Again winning his Shugwana seat in those elections, Mr. Ramsaran would remain the UNC representative for Shugwanas up to September 2006, when a split in the troubled UNC found him joining the newly formed Congress of the People, COP, as a founding executive member. He would formalize his break from the UNC by crossing the floor to become part of a 6-member COP opposition faction in the House of Representatives, consisting solely of former UNC members of Parliament. The COP faction included Winston Dukaran, then leader of the newly formed party. Mr. Ramsaran would remain a member of Parliament until he contested the Shugwana seat on a COP ticket in the 2007 general elections and lost to the UNC's Jack Warner. Though bowing out of electoral politics, Mr. Ramsaran has remained a member of the COP. Manohar Ramsaran is married to the former Amina Khan. They have 2 sons, Ravi, an engineer, and Vinu, a medical doctor.